So for you to declare any financial or other interest just as we move through today's business. With regards to your tablets, you'll know this by now to switch the volume off its function and F8. We haven't received any apologies. All of members are aware of anyone and they wish to apologise on their behalf. Do so now. Apologies. Okay. Chairperson's business. First of all, can I congratulate my colleague Robin Newton on becoming the Principal Deputy Speaker, and I hope that doesn't mean that you're going to depart the committee either. But
no, I have a total commitment to this.
You have a total commitment. Well, I like to hear that. That's good to know. Good to
I've missed that. Congratulations.
So just to congratulate you on that anyway. So thank you very much. We'll look forward to hearing you in the chamber in the not so distant future.
Okay, if I still step aside, yeah.
Moving then to the final budget, obviously, the Minister had indicated that the planned reduction in the aggregated schools budget of 78.7 million is to be offset by an allocation of 80 million. Obviously, this is still causing concern because teachers haven't received their letters, their principals haven't received their letters yet, so they're not really sure how this is actually going to work within the classroom. And there's also probably a number of other questions that perhaps we could ask the department just for clarification on, just in advance of that. I understand that we probably will receive information in the not so distant future, but I suppose there are a number of lines even within January monitoring as well which we could maybe seek clarification on, particularly maybe around the 1.4 million for the nurture units, whether that's going to ease the gap that's likely to take place between the end of the current money in June and then obviously the review in November, whether those schools which are in that current cycle of support for nurture units, whether they'll continue on as a project. So we could ask a number of questions around that, and there's also questions on the delivering social change, the literacy and numeracy money of the 2.6 million. I know that I've been approached by a couple of people with regards to the literacy and numeracy project, and obviously those contracts are now coming to an end of those teachers who are in post, and there's a concern from principals that there's a rapport has now been built up between those teachers and the young people, and I think they're under pressure perhaps to send out letters to end the contract. So really it's to see whether that money is towards that same project, whether there can be continuity of employment. So again, if you're content that we write just to ask a few questions around that issue, and also the timescale for the final budget and when schools will be notified as well. So if members want to ask anything additional to the department.
I was hoping for a briefing from them when they've got to a point when they're clear on, after this week, of where all the different monies are going.
We have been in correspondence with the department over really since their last appearance here as to when they would next come. So we had hoped mid-February.
So, okay, I think let's just keep pushing them.
Yeah, and hopefully the Minister will be able to come to that meeting as well. Anyone else? Any other queries coming out of the budget statement or January monitoring? Okay, great, thank you. I suppose there was a question whether or not we wanted to elaborate or find out whether there were going to be any changes to the AWPU or the Common Funding Scheme. So I suppose that's another question that we could perhaps ask. Okay, we have draft minutes of our meeting of the 14th of January at page 103. The members are content that they accurately reflect that meeting.
Yep.
And also, if you're content that we write to the principals of the two schools which we visited last Wednesday in the Moy, just for the time that they spent with us, and just to thank them for that.
I'd reply back about the two questions that were asked at the end of the meeting about the £1 million or anything.
Mine's no.
No, right.
Okay. Moving then to matters arising.
Could I just, and I say this only in terms of a word of encouragement, but the two young pupils in St John's who stayed outside stood to attention, and then when the headmaster remembered he should bring them in,
After everyone else had left.
And if there's some way that we could offer a word of encouragement to them in your letter to St John's, I think it would be a nice gesture.
Of course, I think if we can include that, that'd be good. Thank you very much. Okay, moving then to matters arising. 5.1, DE consultations. Just refer you to Clark's cover note at page 112, which includes a list of current DE consultations and also the closing dates. I think it was Mr. Rogers who had raised that. Happy enough?
Yep.
BT Young Scientist exhibition. Just refer you to correspondence from them, just thanking members for having attended the event. There's also included a list of participating Northern Ireland schools, to which we can send letters of congratulations. So again, if you're content with that. Our first briefing is in relation to statutory rules, Northern Ireland Teachers Pension Scheme. We just refer you to the Clark's cover note at page 118, and refer you also to a copy of the statutory rule SR 2014/310, the SL1 for the Teachers Pension Scheme, Consequential Provisions, Regulations Northern Ireland 2014, and other relevant documentation. At this stage, I welcome departmental witnesses. We have Seamus Gallagher, who's Head of Pay, Remit and Pensions Policy Team, and Brian Quinn, who is the Pensions Policy Team. You're both very welcome to committee. The reason why you're here is a number of questions were raised at last week's meeting, and if it's possible, you could just brief us on the decisions which we have to make, which we're going to be making, and also if you could maybe tell us the consequences of us not going through with this piece of these regulations.
Okay. Thank you very much again for the opportunity to come and talk to the committee. We have laid the SR on the 12th of December. The Teachers Pension Scheme regulations, which bring in the new pension scheme. I think the last date for annulment is 12th of February. The reason we're making these regulations is because the Public Service Pensions Act Northern Ireland 2014 effectively closes the current teacher scheme, and come 1st of April 2015, and unless this regulation passes and there is a new scheme, then there will be no scheme for teachers to contribute to. Now, the reasons why the Act was passed is because the Westminster Government embarked on a programme of pension reform and effectively advised the Northern Ireland Assembly that unless they implemented pension reform, that there would be a significant cost to the block grant of around 300 million across the whole block grant. Of about 60 million pounds worth of that was for education. So the measures which are contained in the regulations are effectively parity with the scheme that's been introduced in England and Wales and the scheme that's been introduced in Scotland for teachers. So the upshot is that we didn't have any choice but make these regulations.
Is there anything additional that you'd like to say just with regards to the regulations?
You may well be aware that the statutory examiner has made some comments on the regulations. They're mainly in and around clarification about the role of scheme manager. So we have agreed to add an additional provision to provide that clarification and to just amend the definition slightly. And he made a couple of other minor comments around the title of conflicts of interest, so we're going to add in a clarification in a couple of titles. And he also commented on the fact that there was no cost cap included in the regulations. Now, we deliberately didn't include the cost cap because we intended always to consult again on the cost cap, which we've just launched yesterday. So in those regulations we have now included what I have agreed with the statutory examiner as a means of rectifying the comments that he has made, taking account of the comments that he has made on the original statutory rule. So all of those, as our intention, will be in place before the 1st of April, before the rule takes effect.
Okay, and you're currently embarking on a number of roadshows. What has the feedback been?
Feedback's been fairly positive. We met with the unions yesterday, and they're saying all the feedback that they're getting has been positive. We've run 2 roadshows so far, one in Newry and one in Dungannon in the further education colleges, and they've been able to video conference them out to the other campuses. So we've been reaching a fairly wide audience, maybe 70 plus at each seminar. The thing is that most of the people who are turning up in the seminars are people who are probably actually not affected by the changes, people closest to retirement who are most worried, but at least we're able to give those people the reassurance that their pension is unchanged.
Okay, Mr. Lunn.
Yeah, thanks. I'm almost tempted to say I'm sorry to have to drag you back here again, but there was a couple of things raised last week. Just take the simple ones first. And I know we have a lot of information here, but it's so much easier if we hear it from yourselves. Is the death benefit unchanged?
Death benefit is unchanged.
Three times.
It's 3 times salary for an active member. It's 2.25 times accrued benefits for somebody who's out of service, and for a pensioner who dies within 5 years of retirement, then it's 5 times their annual pension less any pension that you would have already received up to that point.
And if that was to happen to somebody already in pension, what about surviving relative?
No changes to the surviving benefit. Relative pensions, they would get a short-term pension based on the pension that was in receipt for 3 months, and then a long-term pension which is calculated with reference to whatever accrued service that they had for family benefits. So it exactly the same as it is now.
All right. So it's not a fixed figure like say 3/8 of.
Instead of 80, it would be, the calculation would be 160. It would be roughly, in general, half of what the pension would be, provided all the service was covered for family benefits.
So somebody takes their pension, dies 4 years later, the spouse would get a lump sum of 5 times the existing annual pension, is that right?
No, they would get a lump sum of 5 times the annual pension less the pension which had already been paid, so they would lose, that would be 1 year's pension in that circumstances, because 4 years had already been paid out. Plus then they would get the 3 months full pension as a long-term benefit, and then roughly half of that pension was in payment for their lifetime. And if there's children, then the calculation is adjusted upwards to take account that there's dependents.
There's not much different to the way it would be at the moment.
No, there's no major difference.
And what about part-time teachers' death benefit in service?
It's 3 times full-time equivalent salary, so no.
Was that a concession or was that always?
No, that's always the way it's been.
Okay. Ill health retirement, early retirement due to ill health, what's the situation?
We're retaining the same system as was in the existing scheme. The only main alteration to that is we've extended the time frame over which somebody who's out of service can apply for ill health pension from 6 months to 2 years, and that's really in recognition that there are some illnesses are slow developing. Now, obviously, if you're applying for it, you have to have left by your employment by reason of health, and the reason that you're applying for the ill health pension has to be the same reason that you left.
A teacher who has 20 years contributions made has to retire through ill health, and there's no prospect of them working again. So what do they get?
There's 2 tiers of ill health benefit. Right? If there's no prospect of them teaching again, only,
yeah.
Right, but they can take up other employments, then they simply get the pension that they've accrued paid early with no reduction. If they would be unable to take up any form of gainful employment, then they would get that amount of pension plus an enhancement of half of the pension which they could have accrued between that point and normal pension age. So if they were 40 and normal pension age was 68, they would get a significant enhancement.
Sure.
So that the aim of that is that we younger people are likely to have dependents. And
the 157th part of it, if a teacher, a newly graduated teacher joins the scheme at age 22, clearly under the rules now he's going to have to work until he's 68 to obtain a full pension. That would be 46 years contributions. Is there any kind of a cap or a limit on the amount of pension that he or she can earn?
There's no cap now, it's because they're not accruing it as service. There's no cap on service. How it works is, in year one, for example, you accrue 1/57th of the amount that you earned.
Yep.
And that's set aside and increased then as long as you remain in service by inflation plus 1.6%.
CPI.
CPI is the plus 1.6%. In year two, then, again, they earn 1/57th of what they've earned in that year. Mm-hmm. That's added to the increased amount from year one. All that is then again increased, and all carries over. So
yeah,
that continues on as long as you remain in service.
The contribution that teacher would have made in the first year is increased by CPI plus 1.6% every year until he reaches, well, whatever the end is. So every year until he reaches retirement age. Unless
they leave service for a period of over 5 years, in which case it's only increased by CPI without the 1.6% from there on.
Okay. Is it? No, I can't really ask you. Is it reasonable? I'm just thinking that. Okay, is it reasonable that somebody? I mean, the old idea of pensions in my time was probably private sector more so. Was if you did 40 years, you got 46. That's 2/3 pension, and that was it. You couldn't actually earn any more beyond that. You would have stopped making contributions. But under these regulations, it seems as if some people may have to do the full 46 years. What happened to that 22-year-old wants to retire at age 60?
If you want to retire at age 60, what you had accrued, you could take at age 60, but it would be subject to an actuarial reduction of around 5% for every year you'd taken it early, with the exception of beyond age 65, the reductions for those years is only 3% for a maximum of 3 years.
So your 22-year-old, let's say he's, as a lot of teachers say, they're finished as they're a spent force by the time they're 55. So your 22-year-old would have done 33 years, and he decides to retire. So he's saying that he's going to suffer a 5% reduction for every year between 55 and 68. So he's going to take 13.5%, which is 65% off the pension.
But by the time he gets to 68, then the minimum retirement age is linked to 10 years by the Finance Act to 10 years before normal pension age. So he won't be able to take it until 58, and the reduction then, yes, you're right, is around 50% on that formula. But he won't be able to take it 13 years early.
Yeah. I think, from what I hear from teachers, that's probably the biggest sticking point. But was that always the case, or was there something similar in place, or is it just more severe than what it was?
No, that's always the case. If you wanted to take it early, there was a 5% reduction for every year you take it early.
Yeah. But in other words, a newly qualified teacher now could pay 36 years contributions. It's only 4 short of the 40-year sort of threshold, and have his pension reduced by 50%.
In return for receiving it 10 years early.
Well, all I want is clarification, and I'm glad you've done that. The potential, I'm sorry about this, Chairman Person, but the potential for an increased level of contribution. I think you mentioned the cost cap there. Is there anything built into the scheme that would trigger an increase in the employees' contribution if the cost of the scheme got out of control again?
Right, we're making regulations on the cost cap, and we'll bring an SL1 after the consultation finishes. But what happens is the cost cap will be measured again in 4 years' time against what's accrued only in the new scheme. It doesn't take account of what's gone in the final salary scheme. And it's built into the Act that if it's breached by more than 2%, then the scheme will have to take action to bring the costs back into line. Now, we would be setting up a scheme advisory board in order to advise the department as to how that would be done. And it can be done in a range of means, either by increasing member contributions, by changing the benefits or the accrual rate. And if there is no agreement, I think the default mechanism is to amend the accrual rate. So instead of 157th, it might be 158th.
Is there, you know, to talk about a trigger point, is there something built into the scheme whereby the what I'd call the employer's contribution can be allowed to rise in those circumstances before there's an effect on the members?
The cost cap would have, in effect, cap going forward. Now, there is a bit of leeway in it, 2% from where it is at the initial valuation. But once it goes beyond that, the cost either has to go onto the member or the benefit structure has to be adjusted to bring it back into. Yeah. But there's no scope then for adding further cost onto the employer.
Well, is there any scope in the SL1 that you're thinking of bringing forward and this to allow for some?
It's provided for in the Act, and we need to follow what's in the Act. We have no scope to do anything different.
Mm-hmm. Just, you know, the teachers are suffering big changes here. They've already had one, now they're going to have another, and their contributions have risen, their benefits have fallen, and their pension age has been extended considerably.
Yep. Under the old regulations, just to put this into perspective, we have increased employee contributions from 6.4 to 9.6%. We're now in possession of a draft valuation, and we've put the figures out in consultation. Mm-hmm. And in the previous scheme, there was employers' contribution rate was to be capped at 14% from the 2008 valuation onwards. Yep. Were you to apply that cap to the current valuation, member contributions would end up as 13.3%.
Yeah, so I know you've allowed for an increase in the employer's contribution up to, what is it, 17.7?
Yep.
Yep. Is that, sorry, Chair, is that not fairly low compared to most other public service schemes?
It's lower than the civil service. It's similar to health. It's slightly higher, but similar again to the health schemes and the teaching schemes in England and Wales. And we touched before that it's all historical, and it's got a lot to do with rates of pay and what factor the pension benefits are built into the negotiations, etc. Rates of pay, for example, for civil servants are traditionally lower than for teachers, and therefore, as part of the pay negotiations, the employer was always making a slightly higher contribution and using that in the arguments for keeping pay down.
Yeah.
But it is a significant amount they asked employers to pay.
You're the expert here, and I'm not, James, but the 17.7 sounds low compared to other public service schemes.
It's comparable to the other schemes, with the exceptions of police and fire, who've got entirely different special provisions, which mean that they can retire earlier, and the accrual rate's much higher.
Well, off the top of your head, what is the employer contribution for the civil service scheme?
It's in and around 19%. I reckon that may not be 100% accurate. We had done some comparison for you, I think it was maybe about a year and a half ago. We can, if you want, we can revisit that and issue it again.
Well, it'll be interesting to see it. Don't know what we can do about it at this stage, but I'm just trying to...
But at that stage, we demonstrated that the schemes were relatively comparable in terms of the amount of money that was being put in and the benefits that were coming out.
Can I just come in on that point? But just in relation to monetary terms, what does that actually mean for employers?
In terms of the pension payroll, the increase of 4.1% from 13.6 is around 38 million.
And at this stage, do you know where that money's actually going to come from? I mean, is that going to come directly from the school's budget, or will there be additional monies given to allow for that?
The draft budget included a provision for 133.2 million, and I think the Finance Minister announced in his speech that he'd been able to adjust that downwards slightly, and that's based on the most recent projections from all the schemes. So we don't know how that money will be passed out, but we understand that there is funding available to meet the additional pressure within the budget.
So that won't be a burden on schools?
That's our understanding, yes.
It's just so I'm absolutely clear then, in terms of the members' contribution, there's no guarantee at all that members' contributions haven't been increased, and all the other changes there's been to the scheme, the new scheme, that members' contributions won't have to rise again.
The only guarantee is that the member contributions will remain at 9.6% unless the cost cap is breached, and we're actually not anticipating that the cost cap will be breached for within the guarantee period of 25 years.
But is the cost cap going to be set at 17.7 plus 9.6?
The cost cap is going to be set at, it's a cost cap for employers, it's going to be set at 13.2%. Now, it is different from the employer's contribution rate because it is only calculated in relation to the costs of the new reformed scheme.
Yeah.
And it will first be measured again at the 2016 valuation.
Yeah. Right. I think I'm done. Just to take it that pensions and payment after age 68 or age 65 or 60, according to your age, will be indexed in the same way as the contributions are at the moment. CPI plus.
Pensions and payment will be indexed by CPI as they currently are.
Plus CPI. Yeah.
Yep. And just.
All right. Is the new rules to allow people to take a lump sum instead of pension, will they apply to this scheme?
Individuals, there is no automatic lump sum in the new scheme. Members will be able to convert pension at a ratio of £12 for every £1 of pension that will be given up in the lump sum, subject to the inland revenue maximum, which is 25% of the fund value.
Yeah.
Slightly more than the 380 it works out at.
So they'll still be able to commute 25% of their pension if they want to?
Yes.
Tax-free?
Tax-free.
Thank you.
Mr. Kinnan.
Thank you. Right at the beginning, and thank you for coming in again, when you were being asked what happens if there's no scheme, does that mean that if we don't agree to this, there's no scheme, that everyone remains on the old pension system?
No, there's
it's just gone finished.
The old pension scheme is closed by the Act.
Just what I want.
So we don't know what would happen, but we would be in a bit of a mess.
That's what I want. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you. It's been very helpful so far. And I suppose if you come back next week again, we'd have even more questions. But particularly, are teachers made aware of the consequences of, saying, having a 5-year break in terms of their pension? I'm thinking particularly of young mothers who maybe would have a couple of maternity leaves and maybe decide to stay at home until their both children start at school or whatever else. Are teachers made aware of that?
We are trying to get that message out as much as we can, and we've started. It features in part of the presentation in the roadshows, which we're trying to reach as wide an audience as we can. Those slides, plus frequently asked questions and a number of fact sheets which we're developing, will be emailed out to every school, and they'll be asked to bring it to the attention of every employee.
I think that's very, very important, because, you know, you take, if we said Trevor talking about, say, a 30-year career, whatever, those young mothers, the majority of the career would be after, say, their 2 children start school. So they would only be getting the CPI the 157th every year. They would lose the 1.6% increase.
Yeah, but if they rejoin again, then any future service is CPI plus 1.6%. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, we are trying to communicate the changes out to the members, and we're trying to highlight the key issues in it.
Yeah, I think that's important. The other one was that I mentioned the last day was section 222, creating this flexibility. Could you maybe explain a wee bit more what that really means? For the, you know, a 22 or 23-year-old person that goes into profession, they don't read at that stage.
No, that is a discretion for the department. And what I was trying to say is that we're giving you an assurance that we would be flexible in the application of time limits, particularly around the actuarial valuations. And I was just highlighting that that provision actually allows us the flexibility.
Be flexible.
Yeah, that's all. That's the reason I mentioned that provision. It gives us the power to be flexible.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. No one else has indicated. Would you mind just staying just for a few minutes, just in case there are additional questions as we move through the next section?
Okay.
You may not be called, but just so that you're aware. Okay, so can I ask for the views, and if you are content to move the motion? I'll put the question that the Committee for Education has considered SR 2014/310, the Teachers' Pension Schemes Regulation Northern Ireland 2014, and has no objection to the rule. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Chairman, we're agreed only because we've no option.
That's right.
It's a pity to be put in this position, frankly, and I don't blame the officials at all, but when you come right up against the deadline, and the alternative is that there won't be any pension scheme in force, either the old one or the new one, in a couple of months' time, and that there's going to be a £60 million penalty. I wouldn't like to be the one to tell John O'Dowd that. And if we don't agree, what on earth option have we? But I think it's fairly clear that the committee has reservations about the way this has been put together.
I think that's certainly noted. But if you're agreed, well, the motion is agreed.
Yep.
Okay. Can we then move on to the proposed statutory rule, Teachers' Pensions Transitional and Consequential Provisions Regulations, Northern Ireland 2015? Seamus, do you want to outline what this actually means, or perhaps Brian can do that?
Brian will cover this wee bit.
Yep. The Teachers' Pension Schemes Consequential Provisions Regulations are due to be laid in draft before the Assembly and will be passed by the affirmative resolution route. They're part of a series of similar legislation that's being brought forward by all the public service schemes to address some unintended consequences of pensions reform which could take place in relation to how the pension schemes relate to primary legislation relating to pensions and taxation. So the intention is to amend some of the overriding legislation around the pensions area in order to make sure that the new regulations work in the way that they're supposed to, and they particularly relate to people who will have service on the existing scheme and who will move to the new scheme, and therefore technically will have service in two separate pension schemes, both of which are separately registered with HMRC. So the provisions that we're looking to change relate to contracting out early leavers, ill health benefits and short service benefits. And there are some fairly technical, as you will have noticed, changes to the primary legislation to take those changes into account. As I've said, these are similar changes are coming for all the schemes across the UK, and they're based on a template provided initially by Treasury, and all the schemes are amending that template legislation in order to take into account the legislation relating to their own schemes. So rather than going into any depth on what are quite complex changes, we'd be happy to take any questions at this stage.
Okay, and similarly, are we in a position, as we were with the previous rule, that we really don't have a great deal of choice?
Yeah, these regulations, the unions actually are in support of them because they close loopholes which could put members at a disadvantage.
Members, any other questions? Mr. Lunn?
No.
Members content then that proposed statutory rule is led? Okay, thank you. I just ask you then to note the consultation on the Teachers' Pension Scheme, Miscellaneous Amendments, Regulations, Northern Ireland 2015. Can I just ask, when does that consultation close?
4 weeks from
It's run off
yesterday.
for 4 weeks.
Is it a 4-week consultation?
4-week consultation. Really, the reason it's only 4 weeks is because we need to make the rule before April.
Okay, so again,
Yeah.
everything's very much time-bound and
Yeah.
around the beginning of April.
We've made unions aware that we would be running this consultation throughout the process, that we would have to do this at the last minute, and it would be a short time frame, and there was no objections. They understand the rationale for that.
Okay. No? Mr. Lunn?
It's only just on harking back to our previous discussion. I noticed in the notes here that the employer's contribution is going up from 13.6 to 17.7, compared with around 20% employer contributions by the Educational Library Boards. They're non-teaching employees. So I mean that's the sort of comparison that was worrying me. You know.
There's a big difference in that they're a funded scheme, and their liabilities are largely affected by how their investments perform. I didn't include them in the comparison in that all the schemes that I was including are the non-funded schemes who don't actually have a pot of money.
Yeah. You kind of draw from that non-funded, which is which here, the non-funded schemes are better value for the employee than funded schemes, or vice versa?
Well, I think the employee's probably paying much the same. The rates are comparable. It's a comparable scheme, even though the employer contribution rate will go up and down in the NILGAS scheme. It may be higher at the minute.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you. So happy to note. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good teacher.
Just move on to our next briefing from the department on our draft on the Community Relations, Education and Diversity Policy, the draft Shared Education Policy and the draft Shared Education Bill. Let's refer you to Clark's cover note at page 291, and then refer you to a copy of the draft Shared Education Bill and Shared Education Policy consultation information on the CRED policy, the business case for the Shared Education Programme and Signature Project, and other relevant information. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can I welcome Christina Graham, Director of Collaborative Education and Practice, Andrew Bell, Head of Shared Education and Community Relations Team, Suzanne Kingan, the Shared Education and Community Relations Team, and John Hunter, Education and Training Inspectorate. You're all very welcome to committee this morning, and could I ask you to make your opening statement, and members will then follow up with some questions.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And thank you to the committee for the opportunity to brief you on the Shared Education Policy and Bill, and also on the Community Relations, Equality and Diversity in Education Policy, probably better known as CRED, and I'll refer to it as that in the course of the briefing. As you've indicated, I'm accompanied this morning by Andrew Bell and by Dr. Suzanne Kingan from the Shared Education and Community Relations team. and also by Dr John Hunter from the Education and Training Inspectorate. So turning first then to shared education, I'm pleased to report that the work has advanced considerably since I briefed the committee on this topic in July 2014. And obviously there is a high level of interest in shared education, and the committee will therefore be aware that the Minister recently launched an 8-week consultation on his proposed shared education policy and the accompanying bill. I would emphasise at the outset that the Department is keen to listen to the views of all interested parties and to have an informed and meaningful discussion on the plans to move forward. The policy itself sets out a comprehensive framework for the future development of shared education, and it builds on the research, consultation and the recommendations of the Ministerial Advisory Group. It aims to ensure that schools and youth settings receive the resources, the support and the encouragement they need, either to start or to continue to develop high-quality shared opportunities for their children and young people. At this point, it is very much a blueprint that seeks to build on our existing educational structures. While not in any way attempting to compromise parental preference, what it does do is offer the opportunity to create a more cohesive education system in which increasing numbers of children and young people from different community backgrounds will be educated together. The policy itself contains 14 overarching actions that will support the advancement of shared education. It sets out plans, firstly, to define, encourage and facilitate shared education through the legislation, and furthermore then to support structures to fund, develop and embed sharing throughout the education system. Practical progress has already been made on key ministerial commitments. The Delivering Social Change Shared Education Signature Project was launched in September, and the first call for applications then issued in November. The response has been very encouraging, and it is clear that there is a significant appetite in our schools for shared education. Successful applicants will be informed shortly. A second call then is planned in the spring for projects that will commence in the autumn term of 2015. Inspection findings and accompanying research then tell us that educational settings are at different stages in their readiness for sharing. Therefore, the application process for the DSC signature programme was accompanied and supported by a new self-evaluation framework which the Education and Training Inspectorate under Dr John Hunter's leadership has developed for shared education. The self-evaluation framework is a tool designed to assist practitioners in carrying out initial self-reflection, to identify their baseline, to then set effective goals and obviously then to measure their progress both throughout the programme and at the end. The process of self-evaluation leading to improvement is fundamental to the further development not just of our entire education system but in this specific instance to the development of shared education. And our intention across the whole programme is that all elements of it will seek to explore, to evaluate and to incorporate key learning across the 4 years of the programme. So it really will be an ongoing learning journey across the 4 years to the end of the programme, looking at the lessons we can learn and how we can modify the programme across the period rather than waiting to the end to accrue all of the learning at that point. Importantly, all of the work in schools will be contextualised in the Northern Ireland curriculum. A key aim is to ensure that shared education becomes integral to and infused with school development planning and improvement. The Education and Library Boards are nearing the end of a recruitment phase for a team of dedicated officers to support schools in advancing shared education. They will provide local, on-the-ground assistance, working with the partnerships to promote, plan and implement shared activity. In addition to that, 16 associate assessors, and they are practising senior managers in schools, have been appointed by ETI to support them in the evaluation process, and obviously capacity building will be developed across the 4 years for those people who are working as associate assessors. Additionally, DE officials are working on proposals for a strategic approach to additional capacity building for teachers that will build on existing expertise. Turning to the Shared Education Bill. A proposed Shared Education Bill accompanies the policy. It provides a legislative definition of shared education, placing a power on the Department and associated arm's-length bodies to encourage and facilitate shared education. Members will be aware that the Education Bill places a similar duty on the Education Authority. As I have outlined, shared education is very much a developing area, and given its wide scope, a power will provide the necessary flexibility as we seek to further explore, develop and embed ultimately the benefits of shared education. Enshrining the concept in legislation sends a very clear message that it is now a permanent feature of our education landscape. Of course, there has been considerable debate about what constitutes shared education. Therefore, the bill takes a very common sense, practical approach. Essentially, shared education is about 2 or more schools, youth groups or early years settings coming together and educating children of different religious beliefs and from different socio-economic backgrounds together. The bill is supported by the more detailed description in Section 4 of the policy as to how shared education will actually work in practice. And if I can turn finally to the CRED policy. And the aim of the CRED policy is to contribute to improving relations between communities by educating children and young people to develop self-respect and respect for others. That policy was designed to underpin and support existing curricular requirements to develop young people as contributors to society, and obviously being contributors to society is one of the 3 key objectives of the Northern Ireland curriculum. It aims to provide young people with the skills, attitudes and behaviours that enable them to value and respect difference and to engage positively with it. Since its introduction in 2011, considerable work has been taken forward. Dedicated CRED support officers have provided advice and help to schools and youth work settings to assess needs and deliver appropriate interventions. Almost 800 schools and youth work settings availed of this support within the last 2 financial years. Guidance is available for all organisations that map the policy across curricular subjects, link to teacher and youth work competencies, and also provide a self-assessment framework used to identify gaps and to plan suitable interventions. A dedicated website provides a one-stop shop for practitioners and includes case studies, resources and support materials. A survey undertaken across schools and youth work settings identified training needs, and a training strategy was put in place. Over 2,000 school leaders, boards of governors, youth service, management, teachers and youth workers attended awareness sessions. In excess of 4,000 teachers and youth workers availed of training to improve their knowledge and skills relating to community relations, equality and diversity. 1 in 4 of our principals engaged in training on dealing with controversial issues in the classroom. Over the last 2 financial years, 500 education settings availed of CRED enhancement funding to reinforce learning, and that involved in excess of 25,000 children and young people. Since its introduction in 2011, a series of measures to assess the effectiveness of the policy were undertaken, and that included a series of focus groups undertaken with practitioners as well as young people, and the commissioning of a module in the Young Life and Times survey. Both concluded that the majority of young people experienced CRED activities And where provision is good or better, these are effective in changing attitudes. The focus groups provided evidence of a more collective, whole-school responsibility for CRED work, rather than relying on one or two teachers, with connections being made across subject areas and clear learning outcomes. The Department then commissioned the Education and Training Inspectorate to undertake a formal review of the CRED policy and its impact on children and young people to inform policy moving forward. Work was undertaken over the autumn term of 2014, and the ETI report is expected to be published in the next few weeks. Early feedback from that report has been very positive. Most of the schools and youth organisations visited demonstrated effective CRED practice. Indeed, the majority of the sessions observed were very good or better. The report will make a number of recommendations for further embedding CRED within the education system. Of course, the committee will be aware that as part of the action to address pressures on the extremely challenging 2015-16 education budget, the Minister has proposed ending earmarked funding for CRED. The public consultation on the budget proposals closed on the 29th of December, and the Minister is reviewing the responses prior to finalising the budget. A full equality impact is planned over the coming weeks. So these are still early days, and there is much work to be done in the weeks ahead to plan how best to move forward within a challenging financial context and in a manner that reflects the Minister's key priorities of raising standards for all and closing the achievement gap. In this context, we are looking at how best to support the further embedding and mainstreaming of the CRED policy and to explore the synergies with shared education in order to ensure that the good work observed by inspectors is built upon and continues to make significant difference. I trust this has provided the committee with an overview of the work to date, including the difficult decisions the Minister has to consider in balancing the budget. And obviously we welcome the opportunity to answer any questions that committee members might have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Faustina. Just in relation to your final comments around CRED, obviously we have the draft shared education policy and the draft shared education bill, and one would perhaps think that there might be an attempt maybe to phase out CRED rather because there may be a certain element of duplication, but you've indicated that perhaps you may be mainstreaming or embedding that. Will they run as separate pieces of work, or will they be working together?
I think it's very much if we look at the CRED policy, which obviously was in place before we've come to shared education. The CRED policy really is designed, as I said, to support the curriculum, particularly with regard to young people as contributors to society. So it's almost like an umbrella policy of which shared education obviously forms a part. But equally alongside that, there are all of the other elements alongside it with equality and diversity. So, for example, there are the elements associated with special educational needs, with anti-bullying, the pastoral elements, all of those things that will enable our young people to be active citizens of the 21st century. And I think the important thing for us as we move forward is, as I've said, even with shared education, is to aim for the integration of all of this work into the curriculum. So earmarked funding for CRED was designed to allow schools the opportunity to take something that they had to think about within the revised curriculum as it was at that point in time, and think, how do we actually make this an integral part of what we do, giving a bit of time and space to both schools and to our youth workers to look at how is this different, how does it fit in, how does it make sense. And I think at this point in time we've progressed that work. There's still plenty of work to do, and obviously the report, I'm sure, will indicate that to us. But I think the two policies for me are complementary, and the shared education forms part of the CRED policy, as do other supporting policies within the department. So there are a number of policies which will support CRED, but the concept of it being phased out to me is not something that would happen. It's more phased in to the curriculum, as I would see it, and the same I think is true with shared education at the minute. The opportunity for schools in particular to look at something that they have to think their way through, and in truth we have to think our way through too. I think it is a learning experience for all of us, but the ultimate aim is for that that to become integral to the work of every school and to be part of the ethos and the DNA, if you want to call it, of every school. But we have to accept where we're at the moment and the fact that we're on a journey to that point. So the same would be true for both of them.
Okay, so in some ways then, the draft policies which we're looking at around shared education enhance and support CRED?
Absolutely.
Okay. Moving then, a number of members have indicated, so moving then just to the bill, and I know that we'll be coming back to that again, and obviously spending a great deal of time around that, but just very quickly, you've mentioned that the shared education policy and bill are going to encourage and facilitate, but yet the Education Act is promote, encourage and facilitate. Why are they not complementary?
Well, I think they are, and I suppose encourage and facilitate to me are probably stronger terms than promote, because promote, I think, is a term that is there when you're not in a position. You want to ensure that the area is highlighted, but it is something where you can't actually affect change. It is about trying to encourage that change, whereas the encourage and facilitate, I think, are stronger words. But it wasn't. I don't know, Suzanne, is there anything?
There's no,
like
there's no inherent contradiction between promote, encourage and facilitate and encourage and facilitate. In preparing the bill, the Minister decided that he would go for encourage and facilitate, which is obviously in line with the Department's duty in terms of integrated and Irish medium as well. So those are the words that went in. There's no inherent contradiction between the two.
Okay, and it's a power rather than a duty?
Yes, it's a power, and the reason, again, for it being a power is that shared education isn't a sector. It's not, neatly wrapped and packed. It will hopefully involve a majority of our schools, and we felt that a power provided more flexibility. It's also certain activities may require more development at a certain time, curricular collaboration, teacher development. It encompasses such a broad remit that a power gave greater flexibility than a duty, which is more suitable for a tightly wrapped and packed sector, if you follow me.
Okay, and obviously around the definition, and I anticipate there will be quite a bit of discussion around this. The definition is in terms of religious belief or political affiliation. How do you determine political affiliation of a child or a young person?
I think the crucial reason why political opinions in there is because not all young people would ascribe to a religious belief, and it was designed to reflect that. In terms of the crucial thing in the definition is that it must bring together children from different community backgrounds, different religious and political belief, and also then children who experience socio-economic deprivation and those who are not. And they're the two crucial elements.
Okay, I'll look forward to the responses in relation to that and discussing that again. So can I move then to Mr Hazard?
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for the presentation thus far. Although I would disagree around promote and encourage and facilitate. I do think promote stronger than the other two, but I'll leave it at that. I just wonder what the impact will be upon integrated education. Critics of shared education will say that this, may be the death knell for the want for integrated, that this may slow the whole process around schools becoming integrated. I'm just really looking at your views on that.
Again, I think it is a case of accepting where we are at this point in time. We do have, it is entirely possible for schools to be developed which are integrated, and also for schools to transform to integrated status, and that hasn't been happening in substantial numbers over the last period of time. But nevertheless, we can't stand still on improving good relations and improving the education system for our young people in a whole range of ways. So I think we have worked certainly with the integrated sector with regard to the previous programmes that have been designed around shared education, and I don't think there's any again contradiction insofar as integrated schools being involved in shared education. And obviously, if in the course of that journey a school decides to transform to integrated status, then that's something that the department would be content to happen. But I think it has to be a case of bringing people with us. I think the idea of saying to people, we're going to tell you what's good for you, you should be doing this, is not the way to win hearts and minds in areas of sensitivity such as this. And I think it is really about ensuring that we look at the stage people are at and allow them to integrate what they do then into their current school. And if they should choose then to transform to integrated status, that option is always there at every point of the journey.
They're complementary to each other. You know, as for some schools, shared education will be the right approach. For other schools, you know, they may want to look at the option of transforming, and shared education can lead to schools wanting to go down the transformation route. For others, it won't lead that way, but the two are complementary to each other.
The integrated sector is also at the upper end of the continuum. You know, we say in terms of the continuum for shared education, integrated sector is at the upper end of that continuum. So the two are complementary. And what we found through the work on the projects, the shared education projects funded by the International Fund for Ireland, is that the integrated sector have already addressed a number of issues which they can share. I mean, shared education is about sharing good experience across schools and between teachers and educators. So for that reason, you know, the integrated sector we see as being part of this, and they will share that experience with other schools, and equally may benefit in other areas from other schools' experience.
I suppose undoubtedly some people will see the integrated sector, as you say, the upper end of the continuum, but there's another view also that I would just like your view on it, that there's a contradiction in that the department are now setting out to encourage and facilitate shared education, where they already had a duty to encourage and facilitate integrated. And some people will say it's a contradiction, that this will negatively affect the original duty. So they shouldn't be doing this. Again, I would just want your take on that.
I think ultimately the department's vision is to ensure that all young people get the best possible education, and that is the overriding vision for the department, and I think that has to inform everything else that happens subsequent to that. So to me there is no inherent contradiction there, in the sense that if we are looking at the range of schools that we have in Northern Ireland, then to encourage and facilitate it, the duty to encourage and facilitate integrated education, to me, is not going to be hampered in any way by something which is slightly different but complementary. So the concept, to me, if you'd like to, if you want to probe it a wee bit further, I'm happy to.
I know there's probably plenty of conversation today around it. It was just really to.
I'm just not sure if I'm answering exactly what you're asking. So
the other key point is that the Minister on a number of occasions has actually stated, when he's talked about shared education, of his commitment and the statutory duty, he remains firmly committed to that. So I don't think there's any contradiction.
No problem. Thanks. Just one final point around the definition, I suppose. How broad can schools take it out? Can it include ethnicity? Can it include urban, rural? Also co-ed. An awful lot of our schools are still single sex. Are we going to see a move around the co-ed? And just finally, will there be a penalty in place for schools who remain in isolation and do not look towards sharing?
Okay, I'm going to ask Suzanne to answer that.
In terms of there's a definition in the bill, but when you go into the policy, there's obviously a detailed description of how shared education will work in practice, and it's broadened out, and it makes it very clear that a key element of shared education is bringing all the Section 75 groups together, and that will obviously include ethnicity, children with disabilities, and a different gender. And in terms of a penalty, no. This is encouragement. This isn't penalties for schools who aren't involved in this, and we hope that a positive approach, that a lot of schools will want to get involved in these programmes.
Thanks for your presentation. I would also cross swords with you about the word promote. I'm quite happy it's not there, because it is, according to dictionary and Wikipedia and all the rest of it, it's a stronger word than encourage and facilitate. But that's by the way. Just leave it out. It's okay.
Okay.
What do you say to people? The end product here, from what I'm reading, of the shared education programme is to promote more integration. If that's not a contradiction. The end result of this programme is actually where the integrated sector is at the present time. It's nice to have said to us only a few weeks ago that where we are is where the shared education promotion people would like to be. Okay. But if you look at it the other way, what do you say to people who say that shared education in a lot of cases may well just be a cop-out, which will give people, parents, groups, schools, the opportunity not to integrate, when that is actually the end goal that we're all looking for. I don't mean integrated per se, the formula. I mean schools coming together. I want to talk about the Moy in a moment, but what would you say to people who you see it as a cop-out?
I think you have to look at this on the basis again. As I said, this is contextualised in the Northern Ireland curriculum first and foremost. It's not about different views in the sense of saying this is about all skills becoming integrated. So you're quite right in what you say there. This is about how our schools fulfil the objectives of the Northern Ireland curriculum, and those are to educate young people as, first of all, as individuals, as contributors to society, and contributors to the education.
So slow you down there just before you finish that. The opportunity for schools to partner each other requires cross-sectoral input. So how can you say it is purely educational? I mean, I wish it was purely educational, but if it's societal as well, and there's a big emphasis here, it's written all over this document, of societal benefit, and the end result being perhaps children being educated together.
Well, of course, I would argue that the societal element is educational in that way because it is a fundamental part of our curriculum. Our young people need to be able to survive and thrive in a global economy in the 21st century, and they need to be active citizens. So all of education is geared to ensuring that our young people have all of the skills and attributes that they need to survive in a global economy. So I think really for all of our skills, really, when we look at the elements of the curriculum, particularly around personal development and mutual understanding, we look at the statutory requirements of the curriculum around active citizenship, learning for life and work, all of which skills are required to pursue in order to deliver those elements of the curriculum meaningfully and to a high quality. Then I think it would be very difficult to do that without dealing with all of the challenging issues that are going to come to light through the interaction with another school. And the evidence certainly that when I was working in ETI, the evidence that we would have accrued through the evaluation of all of the sharing and education programmes demonstrated, I think, very forcefully that young people in those situations, that in order to fulfil the aims of the Northern Ireland curriculum, it would be very difficult to do that without actually engaging with partner schools. And that's something that we will look at as this programme develops, because if you are going to do all of the things that are required in the curriculum, looking, as I've said, just at the curricular elements, but also at thinking skills and personal capabilities, attitudes, dispositions, to do that meaningfully, I think would be very difficult without challenging people's beliefs and attitudes and understanding and tolerating difference and respect for difference. So in that way, I think rather than find ourselves in a situation which has been criticised in the past where community relations, for example, education for mutual understanding were viewed as extra or additional to the curriculum, what we seek to do, I think, through the ongoing work on shared education is to ensure that this is integral to every aspect of education and, in particular, the ethos of a school. So, for that reason, I think it would be very difficult for a school to engage in this in a very, as you described, in a way that would be a cop-out. Obviously, John Hunter is here this morning with us too. So, as this programme progresses and as this work progresses, the expectation also is that that work will be integral to the individual inspection of schools. And therefore, if a school is not delivering in the curriculum that way, ultimately that will come to light through that work also. Having said that, that is not something that is going to happen right now. That is something that will be built up over time and experience across the 4 years, because we want the Education and Training Inspectorate in particular to work collaboratively with the schools to accrue the learning across the 4 years.
It might be also just useful to reference the ETI continuum and the fact that built in, for example, to the Delivering Social Change programme is that schools will progress at least one level along the continuum in three areas. So, you know, progression. Funding is contingent on progression, and progression is built in, progression and evaluation. So there's no possibility of schools engaging in this in a half-hearted or not progressing along that continuum. That's a key element, and indeed schools have been asked at the outset to self-evaluate against that continuum, and John and his colleagues will be evaluating their progress.
Can I ask one more? Thanks for that lecture. The criteria for actually cooperating between sectors, between schools, it appears to allow for the situation where it's a controlled grammar and a voluntary grammar could apply for shared funding. And yet they're technically different sectors, but in terms of societal division and so on, perhaps they're not. But you can contrast that with the situation around an integrated school, which is already operating on a cross-sectoral, for the want of a better phrase, basis, but which can't on its own apply for shared funding.
I think the important thing is that, as Suzanne has said, we're trying to ensure that there is flexibility in how schools will apply for this work, and trying to look at all of this on a case-by-case basis. But it would never be exclusively that we would look at what are the two schools that are working together, because there are so many variations in terms of how schools can be described in Northern Ireland. And I think one of my colleagues described it as the eccentricities of the number of schools that we have. So, for example, we will have a controlled school that may be comprised of almost entirely Catholic pupils. So we have to look, I think, at the range of factors that any group of schools applying for funding is bringing into the proposal, and ultimately it will be on the quality, the total quality of the proposal. So I wouldn't say that we would exclude any partnership, but something that looks, as you've just indicated, that isn't going to challenge the school in some way to further its thinking, I think will be picked up in the range of evidence that the school presents in the proposal.
But an integrated school, which is, as you say, Andrea, at the top end of the continuum as we speak, can't of itself apply for shared education funding under this, unless they partner with somebody else. Can't do it in-house. They're where you want to be.
One of the key things of the programme is that it should be mutually beneficial to schools in the partnership, and integrated schools can bring their experience to another school in terms of how they deal with some of the issues around educating Catholic and Protestant young people, and indeed people from other communities together. But ultimately, there should be benefit to both sides around this, because it is about learning for the young people, but also ultimately about improving educational standards and learning for teachers and schools. And what we again have found through the evidence and the pilot projects are that when schools do work together on that basis, including integrated schools, that schools within that partnership benefit in totality. So to actually, leave an integrated school on its own means it wouldn't benefit from some of the wider issues that potentially it could do.
Can I ask about the MOI just very briefly?
Can you bring you back in again?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Ms. Trouser, you wanted on that point?
Two integrated schools, sure. Can they be in the
process? We look at everything on a case-by-case basis. There's no definites you can or you can't. Everything is going to be looked at in terms of the quality of the application. We don't rule out anything at the outset. For example, a controlled integrated school, it can fall in, is it controlled or is it integrated? A controlled Irish medium school, is it controlled or is it Irish medium? There's, schools can have a multiplicity of identities, and I think it's really important that we don't at the outset say this won't qualify or that won't qualify without really looking at the details of the proposal. Is it bringing a good community balance and a good social balance together? And that's our plan.
And I think one of the issues for the integrated sector is also that we have a number of schools where there isn't a balance insofar as even the expected levels that there would be. So if there's an advantage there for schools that are close to each other, for example, and are integrated but have a different balance in a way, and those schools can benefit from working together, we would absolutely look sympathetically at that type of submission.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kinahan.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. And I share almost all your goals and trying to get everything integral. Yeah. I'm concerned when we look at the definition in the bill coming up that it is going to force people to have to choose to be of certain either religious beliefs or political beliefs. Is there not a better route of including with it, though, across community, because there are so many other little different forms of communities in an area. And one of the questions I'd been pushed to ask was, should we not be including communities in their schools, and particularly mixed communities, because everything isn't just Catholic, Protestant, or rich and poor and everything else. Is there not a room in there to have a little bit more flexibility by making it mixed community rather than trying to divide us into different
Okay.
groups?
I mean, I think the reason, obviously there's certain things that it's possible to put into legislation, some certain things that it's not. Religious background of children, you know, we would collate that through the school census. The same in terms of socio-economic background. It's quite easy to read at a school level. It doesn't involve an individual's child self-identifying for the purpose of a programme. It's information that's readily available, and therefore it's easy to make you know, a rough and ready assessment of a school, which, you know, religious background the children come from, and also the social mix in the schools. So from that perspective, I mean, the legislation allows us. Shared education simply must bring together children from different religious or community backgrounds. The definition does that. It also says it's about a good social mix and achieving a good social mix. We know that systems where there is a good social mix tend to achieve higher, and it's about tackling that long tail of underachievement that has pervaded our system. So it's a common sense approach. You know, it does what it's possible to do in terms of a legal definition.
I think when you look at the policy as well, as Suzanne has earlier said, that the policy does refer to all the Section 75 groups, so it does include all of those. You know, and that builds and adds to the legislative definition.
I mean, my aim is really to push, because we're also pushing for community use of schools and everything. So if you add into it whether it's football, rugby, cricket, Gaelic, whatever, I mean, there's a whole lot of other different groupings in there.
I think in trying to keep the definition, as Anne said, simple, I think it's taking account also of the fact that every school is required to interact with its community. That is a key element of every school, a good school, that, you know, one of the 4 tenets of it. So therefore that expectation is there within this particular programme. Our expectation also is that schools will demonstrate links with not just external stakeholders, but how they are actually going to improve their interactions with community. And the interactions with community form a key part of the framework that ETI has developed. So for us, actually, I think one of the benefits will be that schools will look much more systematically at how they are interacting on that community level. So it isn't that it has been ignored in any way. I think it is, as Suzanne said, it's about keeping the definition as practical and as common sense as possible, while being very aware that there are other requirements there that will support exactly what you're talking about.
I don't know, slightly sort of different. Long term, do you see this, when we have this conflict at the moment between schools that are integrated and those that have super mix and are in different groupings, do you see it long term leading towards a change in how we define actually integrated schools, and we make things more flexible? Because part of our difficulties at the moment are we're stuck to the definition of how integrated is, and that means everything else is seen as not being integrated. Do you see it leading to change, so that the schools that actually might be controlled but are really well mixed being allowed to be sort of relabelled without it causing?
I think there's that issue that it's almost like a label, as opposed to us really looking at what are the important elements of any school. And so I suppose the department's duty is to encourage and facilitate integrated education, not to encourage and facilitate the integrated schools or sector as it exists at the minute. So if we move to a world where there is a broader definition of integrated education, because we do have a definition of integrated schools from the Tracy judgment, obviously, of what will constitute an integrated school. But I think if we can move to a world where there is that broader understanding of what integrated education means, then obviously that would be something that would be welcome. But again, I think it's, as Suzanne has talked about, the debate around what does shared education mean, the same debate exists around what does integrated education mean, and I think that is what we're attempting to do in the definition within legislation, is to give something straightforward on which we can build over time then and begin to get a clearer consensus around what that definition is.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. And just really on that point, do you see shared education as reconciliation or as achieving educational outcomes?
Both.
I think, I mean, this is something which I think we are, yes, debating and discussing at the moment as well too. I suppose I would see reconciliation outcomes as an element of educational outcomes, because all of those things are intertwined. I think everything that we do in the education system will lead to an educational outcome. I think where we haven't got a sufficient clarity is around talking about what are the curricular outcomes, what are the reconciliation outcomes, what are the examination outcomes then, for example. And I think the language around all of that, truthfully, is quite confusing at the minute, and we struggle with it ourselves. And I think part of the learning process for all of this will be to get a sharper understanding of the various elements and then how they all fit together. So that's the honest answer to that one.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, and you're very welcome. And I think, I suppose, in terms of just listening to other people's questions there and what's coming out, you know, we talk about schools. Is this about schools working together or children working together? I think certainly, you know, there's a certain amount of confusion out there, because when we look at examples of really good practice and sharing, let that be integrated. Let it be, say, Shimna College in my own constituency, or a controlled school like Down High School, or a maintained school like St Columban's in Bangor, where there are excellent cases of sharing going on. Those schools are actually being disadvantaged because they can't apply for this funding. And you know, if our priority is bringing children together, surely there should be a lot more flexibility. Yes, it's nice to join up with a school from a different management type, but if the priority is our children and our children working together, then the department should be creating more flexibility to encourage and facilitate shared education in the schools that are doing a really good job. Let it be integrated, maintained or controlled.
Well, they can apply for the funding. All schools are eligible to apply for the funding. They're you know, what we're saying is, quite rightly, as you're saying, there's really good practice in a lot of our schools, but we want to share that practice. We don't want to keep it pocketed in a few schools, and those schools are very well placed to participate in shared education programmes and bring the expertise that they have developed over dealing with children from different religious backgrounds within their own school. They're really well placed to bring that to a wider reconciliation programme in dealing with schools from different community backgrounds, and that's what the programmes are about.
Yeah, but surely in one of the essential criteria, they're knocked out immediately because they haven't joined with a school from a different sector.
But it's about you know, two or more schools coming together to share, and they can apply. They can partner up with another school and apply for the programme and share their good practice.
Yeah, it just goes back to my original point. You know, it seems more about the politics of bringing schools together than actually celebrating children working together.
Well, first of all, the policy is very much learner-centred, and indeed the model, the continuum model, makes it absolutely clear it is learner-centred and it is to the benefit of the pupils and children and young people. But from that point of view, then you need to ensure that obviously the education workforce have the capacity and the skills to address those issues as well. So it is very, you know, that it is very much sort of focused around the whole broad spectrum of being beneficial to the schools and to the pupils. Ultimately, if it's beneficial to the schools, the pupils are going to benefit as a result of that. So it is very much learner-centred.
Can I go on to John too? Now, I'm delighted to hear, John, about the self-evaluation framework for sharing, because, you know, there's a lot of confusion out there what actually is sharing. Yeah. And unless we have that framework, how can you set a baseline? So could you tell me a wee bit more about that?
Yeah. Could I begin by saying that we recognise very clearly that schools are at different starting points in this, and some do not wish to be at the starting point. Therefore, the concept of continuum is to cater for those projects or those partnerships that we get underway and those that will need further time and training. So the idea behind the continuum was to allow partnerships to have something to measure themselves against, a set of indicators or criteria as a baseline. And our view was that the partnerships set their baseline, and our job is I think particularly in year one is that have been very supportive of quality assuring in working partnership with them. But to throw out the old concept of we're policing a system here, we're working alongside, we're actually in a learning mode as well. The continuum deliberately did not call each pillar of it level 1, level 2, level 3. We were very deliberate about giving the notion of defining and of expanding and of embedding, and that schools in partnership will find that they may not just be in one section but in a variety of sections, and therefore can draw on what targets they wish to set for the partnership. So we were very clear that, and very honest, that schools out there are not entirely sure what this concept is. And there will be those that have the experience of having gone through the IFI projects who probably will be the mentors and leaders in the first outworking of the programme. And we felt that the continuum was the beginning of allowing them to give themselves a self-evaluation, almost a mirror to their current practice, which could be used individually within the school, but more particularly as a partnership working. So it's designed for that reason. And I have to say, we did consult quite widely, it was built out of Every School a Good School, the concepts within that, but it also, schools are very used to Together Towards Improvement, and they're very familiar with the methodology and approach within it. And I think it has been so far well received by the particular schools that have shown the interest in shared education.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Chair, and just one last one. If this is about all our children, why has this not been extended to special schools?
It is. Special schools are also involved in it, and indeed, again, the experience that we would have with the IFI funded projects is that special schools were involved in those projects, and where they were involved, that brought a completely new dimension to the partnership and more learning for the partnership. So yes, special schools are involved.
But if they were to move on to look for funding, the special school would have to join up with one from a different background.
They would
different management authority.
They would join.
Not a different management authority.
Different,
no, just not another special school.
Same sector.
It could be the same sector, a controlled special school and a controlled school. There would be no issue that. We would just look at it again. It's always on a case-by-case basis, but special schools are very much included in the programme.
That's okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Mr. Newton?
I'm content, Chair.
Are you? Okay. Mr. McCausland?
Thank you. Just a quick question and then the main point. But there was mention there under Every School a Good School, there were 4 areas in there, something around interaction with the community. Is there some documentation you could direct me to just to get some more indication of what that is expected to mean in practice?
The policy itself will give you the 4 elements that are required from schools, and that would be, first of all, obviously, as Andrew has said, learner-centred, quality of learning and teaching, quality of leadership, and then the school and its community. And within the Every School a Good School policy, you'll find all of the various indicators then that demonstrate that.
Thanks. The question I wanted to touch on was, and it's interesting in Suzanne's phrase about a school could have a multiplicity of identities, and that's true of us all, as well as schools. And you touched there on the issue of, as was the Chair raised earlier, about political identity and religious identity. But running through all this documentation again, you get the word cultural coming in. So, and we all have a cultural identity as well as a political and religious identity. So, if you're bringing schools and children, however it is, together to share, and I'm sure those are some of the areas that they would want to look at in the course of their sharing, how do we ensure, and is there anything in there to ensure that when they do come together, they come together? It was a point that was raised, I think, by Professor Hughes the day she was here, around the issue of equality, where they both come together with a similar understanding, appreciation of the identity of their home and the community from which they come. Because there are some schools that have a very strong focus on cultural traditions. Obviously, if a school's an Irish medium school, it would have a focus on an Irish culture. Largely the same with CCMS, but it may not be this clear with controlled schools. So how is that issue dealt with?
I mean, in terms of cultural understanding, I mean, having a culturally diverse learning experience is already part of the curriculum, so that is a requirement of the curriculum. That's what it's built upon, and it's a key element at both primary and post-primary. And indeed, at key stage 3 and above, cultural understanding features in every subject area under developing young people as contributors to society. It is an area where you've quite rightly said that there are some schools that are maybe more advanced than others in terms of, addressing those issues. So there is an area there where there is an opportunity in terms of improvement, and shared education certainly does bring that opportunity to explore identities and cultural backgrounds. And indeed, I think when Professor Hughes was here, they did talk about the cultural difference where shared class broadens and deepens a pupil's experience. That was certainly the experience that we had around the IFI shared education programmes. But it does allow for those. One of the other issues, because we've touched upon the CRED policy as well, and one of the issues around CRED policy is about developing respect and self-respect and respect for others. And part of the CRED policy, part of the work which has actually helped schools move forward in this area, is allowing pupils to fully explore and understand their own cultural background before they, as well, either before or as well as engaging with those from others. So it is a core element, but I think shared education will actually help in this process. Well,
it's good educationally that children are aware of the culture of the home and community from which they come. It's also a human rights issue, as we would know. But the issue then is, how is it actually implemented? Now, from my understanding, it's not properly monitored across sectors. Nobody has done any work on it. I've asked all of the different groups that have come in. It's the same question I ask all the time. And it's an area, I think, where there has been a lack of investigation, a lack of research, a lack of establishing of good practice, so that some sectors can learn from other sectors. And I would just make the point to you, and we'll come back to it again, I'm sure, in the future. There is a vast difference between the nature of cultural traditions work in controlled and maintained and Irish medium schools. Huge difference. Even though the controlled school may be in a community where it is essentially monocultural, serving a particular community, which by nature quite often will be that way. I was in a maintained school, and they were announcing the school play, and it was the life of the Irish rebel Robert Emmet. I don't think I'm going to ever go into a controlled school and find that they're doing a school play about the siege of Derry.
Well, I think you've also got to be aware of the differences in the legislation that constitutes the schools. Mm-hmm. Controlled schools have a legislation, or schools that provide a non-denominational religious instruction, and that is obviously a different, and that obviously feeds through then to cultural identity as well. I was just building on what Andrew said. What
do you mean by that, about cultural identity in controlled schools?
Well, there's a difference in the legislation that,
the legislation doesn't specify that a Catholic maintained school has to do only Irish culture and Irish perspective on life.
I would appreciate that.
And likewise, there's nothing that says, I would suggest, what's been indicated there maybe about controlled schools.
I think
controlled schools surely should reflect the culture under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Must reflect the culture of the homes and the community from which the children come. And if it's a school, for example, if a school is in a Catholic maintained sector, they probably have an Irish traditional music group. If it's in the case of a controlled school in a largely Protestant unionist area, what's the equivalent of a traditional music group?
I think the important thing, as you've pointed out, is our lack of monitoring specifically.
Monitoring, and would you concede research as well?
I'm sure there probably is a lack of that also, but I think the important thing, I do think we have to be careful about constituting particular sectors in some way as well as lacking in some way in terms of cultural identity, because, you know, certainly for me as an English specialist, when you talk about the plays, my choice first of all would be the quality of the literature, and then looking at what are the cultural
I don't know whether the play
about
about Robert Emmet, The Irish Rebel, was good literature.
And it may not be. I'm not familiar with that, in all honesty, nor am I familiar with plays on the Siege of Derry either, but I think it is about, first and foremost, what are the educational benefits that are going to accrue from this, and are there opportunities then to explore cultural identity, first of all in your own school, but then ultimately in a programme like this. If the vehicle was literature or drama, then it would be at looking at what are the benefits that can accrue for both schools from that. But importantly, I think in terms of trying to address your concerns, because I think they are genuine concerns, and I think it's an indication of where we are at this point in time in our curriculum development. I think the continuum that John has talked about, the framework for development there, what that does is challenge schools to have the important conversations that you are talking about, and I think they are hugely important that we begin to have those conversations. But in allowing either two or more schools to come together, there is that questioning then of their work in all of those areas at this point in time, and what their school is about, in order to begin to develop the partnership. And I think certainly in the work that I would have done with John prior to that, what we discovered in all of this work was that even we in the inspectorate at that point in time in evaluating programmes, we didn't have the language to explain and articulate our thinking in a way that allowed us to communicate that effectively with other people, and that has been part of the learning process. So your question is well asked, I think, and I think it's one we hope to answer.
The monitoring and the research which hasn't been taking place, yes. How does that get started?
I suppose there's a part of I think if I look at the CRED survey, the direct connection and observation of practice in schools set out to meet the needs of their school population. So in one school, for example, they may have a prayer room so that Muslims can have the time and space to explore and develop and meet their own religious needs, while in others there could be a common room whereby each denomination is allowed to practice distinctly or to learn from one another. All of those are building an understanding of difference and diversity, which is contributing to those who are developing and understanding fully their own identity vis-à-vis the identity of others. Add into that, if a school's focused entirely on special educational needs, then you will find that becomes a strong focus within the cultural aspect of the school. And when we were looking at the continuum, I think it's helpful to think that when one of the areas which schools find more difficult are to face the challenging issues that are the elephants in the room in the situation. And the best practice has actually brought within the PDME programmes the more controversial issues, so that pupils can use that platform to understand where their opinion sits vis-à-vis their cultural thinking and experiences. When you get to the embedding stage, it should be seen as the way we do things about here, that it's open, it's natural, it's transparent, that you think about others and you reflect that in your own thinking. Therefore, it should give dispositions that should engage better the learner and therefore lead to better outcomes in that sense.
The issue I've raised, I'll not pursue it beyond this, just a final comment. It's an issue in itself.
Yeah.
But it is given an added importance and significance once you move into the area of shared education. Because when schools are, A is doing what it does, B does what it does, and they're miles apart, once you bring them together, there's an additional focus on this. And I think this issue about the cultural identity of controlled schools, based on the United Kingdom government's commitment to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, is fundamental. And I asked Inspectorate about it, I've asked the academics that have come in from the various universities. I will keep on about it because it has been the elephant in the room. and nobody's talked about it.
It is a key. I mean, it is a key element of the CRED policy. I mean, the CRED policy is founded on the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, and the policy is there. We have always said that the CRED policy was there to support and underpin what was already in the curriculum and to help schools actually deliver what was in the curriculum. And through the implementation of the CRED policy, I mean, one of the findings which I understand the Inspectorate report is likely to reflect is that the experience, the learning of young people has been experiential. So when you bring young people together on that basis on a cross-community basis, it offers more opportunities to explore those issues. And if young people don't feel that they know sufficient about their own background, that generates the interest, and they go and they seek that. So the CRED policy, I think, is a starter around that, and has moved the work forward and has enabled schools to better address that issue. But as Christina has said, there is more work that can be done in this area.
Much of the literature suggests that success through shared education is clearly linked to a balanced partnership in which the partners have common goals and common outcomes identified. And in that sense, they really need to be focusing on those issues which provide division and difference, so that the understanding and respect does grow with that. And the other aspect of it, shared education should highlight identity but not threaten it. And I think in the best practice that we have looked at, pupils, young children and young people are very happy and content to engage in conversation with that. And in fact, in our discussions with young people, they're becoming more articulate about their understanding and how they can express their identity, and also to explain the commonality of it with other youngsters. So I think that, you know, in terms of culture, it's a mindset, it's an ethos, but there will be those schools that have to move from the link being an event or being a subject to subject across the school's event to it becoming a way of thinking and planning, not just at leadership level, so across departments. That takes time to embed, and I think partnerships will need that time. Very, very few, if any, schools are at the embedding stage, and quite a number are at the first two stages, that of what is shared education, and it has to be something that has benefit to all of the participating schools. It's when we get to the expanding stage where we begin to see that there is a culture or ethos of thinking shared education-wise, that I think then it's then that we will see the recognition. And the programme that we are looking to evaluate, it's a 4-year programme, so evaluation will take the 4 years. So we expect that through consultation support, interim reporting, that it's only in the final report that we will be able to say what has been the positive outcomes of the experience of the shared education for all of the partnerships.
Okay, thank you, Ms Overend, and then I'll take Mr Lunn and Mr Hazard.
Thanks, thank you, Chair. Discussion's been very interesting this morning. I'm just wondering, there are a few area learning partnerships in existence already and are very successful. And I'm sure, I presume you've been engaging with them. Well, have you learned? What have you learned from them? Because sometimes partnerships have been very successful, but with other education policies, such as the entitlement framework, really then forces schools to step back and to deliver subjects, the whole range of subjects themselves, which means they step back from the area partnership and it's not as successful as it was. You know, so there's that, you know, a variation in policy going in opposing directions, and, you know, how do you see that being solved?
I think all of it is a learning process, and if we think back to the beginning of area learning communities, that was something that really of itself didn't grow organically. Schools were really grouped together into area learning communities, and what we found is that over a period of time, some of those have really taken off, as you've indicated, and have become stronger and stronger, and others still struggle. And I think it's something that, from our perspective, we can look at the successes of area learning communities and actually allow some of this work to take place within those particular communities. I think everything is staged in some ways, and as John has indicated, there is a progressive journey there to be accrued. In the first instance, really, the entitlement framework was looking broadly at expanding choices within the curriculum and schools partnering for that reason. And we've seen some very good work that has accrued over time. I think where those partnerships are healthy and where additional breadth has been offered to the curriculum, then those particular area learning communities are in a really strong place to ensure that they can now integrate all of the more challenging aspects of shared education into the work that they're doing, because they have much more mature relationships built up. But the original focus was on curriculum. Now it is on integrating, I think, and benefiting from all of the other elements that they may or may not have addressed, because obviously there are area learning communities which have looked very much at shared education also, but I think it's about taking those steps. So initially... Sorry,
can you explain that a bit more? What are those steps you think?
The steps of actually looking at the broader elements of the curriculum. If I could use an example, for example, if I were working in school at the moment as an English specialist in terms of teaching GCSE or A-level, then I will select particular texts to teach. So I can choose texts that don't appear to have any particular controversial issues in them, or as we talked about earlier, something which is related to a cultural identity of any kind related to this society. So in choosing the text initially, I think you're going to decide what is it that you want to focus on. You can develop empathy, I think, for all of the young people, which is part and parcel of our requirements here around equality, diversity, community relations. I could do that with a group of young people and never deal with anything which might challenge their thinking with regard to how they view others, how they view difference, how they are tolerant and how they are resilient in the work that they do. Or equally, I can teach that text and ensure that alongside the literary elements of it, I am also tackling explicitly, as opposed to implicitly, but tackling explicitly all of those elements that we're talking about, which challenge their thinking, which challenge them to look at the other young people who are working in the class with them and think about how all of those elements of their experience actually work to fulfil, first of all, the examination requirements, because obviously what they're doing, but the broader aims of the school in which I would be teaching at that point in time.
If I understand your question right, your question is really why will schools step back from this at a later stage?
No, what I'm trying to say is some area learning partnerships have been successful in working together to deliver subjects, but the entitlement framework has maybe meant that some schools say, well, actually, we need to deliver all the subjects ourselves and not work with the other schools. Right. And so everyone's, the schools are going to, the children are going to lose out on that sharing experience because of this. Also, what policy is coming from education that every school needs to deliver the entitlement framework.
I think
so. How can you overcome that to encourage the sharing to continue?
I think the simple answer to that question is the experience that the schools have had who have been involved in it, because when schools actually start doing sharing, they start to realise the benefits from sharing. Those benefits can be in terms of, say, for example, a couple of small rural schools coming together where maybe there's a teacher teaching a year group and they're the only teacher in that school. They suddenly have a partner school and they suddenly have somebody else that they can bounce ideas off, share materials with. They can do joint joint development events. What we find is that with those schools who were funded through the IFI programme, and don't forget the funding for that finished, the schools started to realise the benefits themselves that can come from the partnership, and that's what drives them forward in terms of moving to a more embedded stage. And once the schools start to realise that, then they tend not to step back from it. What they want to do is to further explore that and to further benefit it.
I appreciate what you're saying. But sometimes you might just get a new principal come in and have a totally different idea, and then the whole thing might fall apart. And in that aspect, can you step in, provide guidance, or is there anything can be done to save it?
Again, one of the key things with shared education and indeed with community relations, equality and diversity, CRED policy as well, is that it needs to be in a whole school approach, because once you get it into a whole school approach, if you suddenly change the principle, there are enough other people within that school who know the benefits, who can explore those benefits, explain those benefits to the principal, and they become the driving force. What we find, particularly with the CRED policy, one of the findings of the ETI report that actually around the previous community relations schemes was that it was left to one teacher or one person within a school who really wanted to drive that. If that person suddenly had stopped, once you spread it to whole school basis, then that whole culture spreads throughout the school, and it, as John has said, it becomes what we do around here, and that avoids the sort of issue which you're talking about.
I can give you an example from the special school viewpoint. When special schools were, were invited to join area learning communities at the beginning, I think the first year and a half, they were coming to people like me and saying, "You've absolutely no idea why we're in this partnership. What use is it for us? What are we getting from it?" But another year down the line, they had found their niche, and the others had recognised that there was something to be learned from the special schools being in the sector. And at this stage, a sizable number, if not more than 50% of the learning communities have established subgroups for special educational needs support across the learning communities. And those have been driven by the special schools. So in some ways, area learning communities and shared education within those will be successful, but in there are people who are willing to drive it and sustain it, and we all feel we'll get something from this and we've something to gain from it. So it is, in that sense, the better area learning communities are those that have been very active about how can we help our pupils and our learners, irrespective of our school, but taking our shared responsibility for pupils across the area learning community. And that's where we wish to end up, that we move from thinking just of my pupil, but thinking of all pupils. And I think that's where it will contribute to improvement.
A very positive thing in the applications for the Liver and Social Change project is that we've seen quite a significant number of schools that originally came together as partners in an area learning community wanting to build on that work and come into the shared education programme, and there was a notable number of schools and partnerships like that, and again that's very positive and very encouraging.
Just one final question. Just thinking, you know, everything that you talk about is all the carrot. Is there any stick in your thinking or is it just all carrot?
I think ultimately the evidence that we have accrued to date in the evaluation process around all of the previous work that has been done has indicated really quite clearly that it would be very difficult to deliver the Northern Ireland curriculum meaningfully without engaging in some form of shared education. And I say that as partially hypothesis at the moment and partially evidence-based. We don't have all of the evidence to be very firm about that, but I think really and truly that is where we will find ourselves, because the more we explore it and the more we look at it, that seems to be indicative of what will constitute a good school. Because if you're going to deliver the curriculum in its entirety and if subsequently look even at inspection outcomes after a 4-year period, then I think it would be very difficult to justify how you were doing that without engaging in partnership with other schools. So that's the answer at this stage I would give you, and I would like to think that we will get more information on that as we move through the programme.
Maybe it's important to say that alongside the shared education projects, we took a decision that in all inspections from last September, we would report on shared education where we found evidence that it was good practice. So it's the carrot that is at work, and our view is that because it is an option, that those schools willing to move in that direction will find it recognised and celebrated through either their own internal evaluation or indeed through the inspection process.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you. Mr. Craig, you had indicated on a point that was raised during that last question session.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and apologies for being late. I was just picking up on what you were saying about the learning experience and the whole shared scenario, and especially around the area learning communities, because I think Ms. Overend raises a good point here. I can speak from experience here because I know the school I'm chair of governors, we linked up with the local maintained school on the A-level curriculum, and it's been a good experience for both schools because it shared resources. Now, I think I've listened to the debate since I've come in here, and we've been talking about the shared experience. The shared experience is almost a byproduct of what actually drove all of this, which is actually the shared resources. Are we going to lose sight of the shared resources aspect of this? Because ultimately I think this is where, for the Minister to get round any sort of financial difficulties that are coming down the road for not only education but every other department, that aspect of it needs to be key and central to what's driving this forward. In some respects, the lack of finances is going to bring ultimately some form of integration into the whole sector. Is that still the main driving force, and is that still the main goal in all of this? Or are we now starting to change the emphasis?
When you say the main driving force, I mean the case for shared education is based on three main areas. One being educational, the educational case; second being the social case; but the third, which is equally applicable, is the economic case. And there are benefits to be accrued from schools sharing resources in the way that you've said. Part of the policy is obviously around the shared campuses programme, and there are opportunities within the shared campuses programme. I know you had witnesses here from the department last week talking about that. So that's an opportunity. But at the school level, yes, schools do find that there are opportunities where they can actually save resources if they do joint development days together. Obviously, at half the cost if they're bringing the facilitator in, they can share materials, they can share resources, and that ultimately is still a key element of shared education in terms of moving forward. So the focus has not shifted from that. But the focus is not primarily just on the economic case and the need to save money. It's not driven by that. It's driven by the educational case, the social case, and the economic case.
It might be helpful to add that our view through the inspection process is that the last year of the inspection of the evaluation has to focus on not on the progress that has been made, but on the capacity of partners to develop and sustain the provision, and particularly to have to think of that you have built it into your system rather than that there will be ongoing resource, which there may not be. So we thought our last year has to focus very strongly on how partners will sustain the provision beyond the funding as it currently is.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Lunn, you're coming in again for a short question.
Short as you like. Just about the Moy experience. We were there last week. We visited the two schools. Two good schools, very committed board of governors, principals, teachers. I think we've formed a good impression of both of them. But we've got this proposal now which is one of your projects, bring them together on one site under one roof, but with different identities, different classes, different uniforms. So you know the argument. What soundings would you take before you made a decision to support a scheme like that, which is so far pretty unique. And what's the extent of parental involvement and parental choice, and you're making a decision like that?
I mean, that's the remit of the team that were here last week. But what I can tell you is, because obviously the work that we've been doing around the likes of the CRED policy, etc., is that those skills have worked quite closely over a number of years. They have quite an experience built up, as I'm sure you will have found when you actually visited those skills of working together. And their community, one of the things that we've said, particularly around this whole area, is that communities need to be ultimately comfortable with what is proposed, so therefore skills need to engage with the communities. And my understanding is, I know that they did a number of sessions within those skills where they brought communities in, they brought local politicians in, they brought councillors in, etc. And they did do a lot of work with the communities. But you know, the expectation is that skills, by the time they're coming forward with a proposal, whether it be for a campus, whether it be for shared education, or that they are engaging with their school communities, the teachers, the pupils, the parents, and the wider communities that they serve.
Okay, so
in the protocol documents, you know, for the campus programme, one of the things they have to clearly demonstrate is that they have the support of the individual managing authorities and provide clear evidence, as Andrew says, that they have engaged with the communities and that they have the support of the community for the proposal that they're coming forward with. Yeah,
that was my point, really. The school did do a community survey, and the responses were 85 responses in favour of the solution, which is now on the table, 70 in favour of an integrated model, and 5 who didn't want anything to do with either. The department has the same obligation to promote shared or integrated, more or less. You can forget about the word promote. So why would the department run with such an unusual solution to bring them together under one roof but maintain different identities? I'm well aware that the CCMS opposed this thing at the start. I've now come round to accepting what's on the table, but would have opposed implacably any further move towards integration. But where does the department's obligation in all this begin and end? It seems to me that this was an ideal opportunity for a groundbreaking solution, the sort of solution that we need to see in Northern Ireland, of a maintained school and a controlled school actually coming together. Use the word integrated or otherwise. An amalgamation of two schools from different sectors was there for the taking, and we have gone this route.
I think the department doesn't superimpose solutions on the communities. This was the proposal that came forward from the community and from the managing authorities. That's the department's role, to look at proposals as they come forward from the communities. It's not the department's role to superimpose a preferred solution on the individual communities. That is the proposal the community came together. I think another point is that nothing in education, you know, is permanent for any amount of time. You know, it may be that these schools develop and evolve as they go forward in their new building, and you know, there's plenty of scope within that to do that.
I get the impression from both schools that is their ultimate wish. So, you know, encourage, facilitate the same obligation on either solution from the department. Surely the department must have an opinion as to what's the best way forward.
Well, I think we know from experience that if you try to drive ahead of what communities are prepared to do, that's when you run into difficulties. And therefore, from the department's point of view, what a community is comfortable with is really where the starting point is. And we don't want to discourage communities in terms of moving forward. I mean, it is because those schools have done a lot of sharing over the past. The opportunities for sharing that their model particularly will give increase the number of opportunities for sharing, so it moves the work forward in that area. And as Susanna said, you know, over time that will continue to move forward. And I think we need to move at the pace at which communities are comfortable with. And in that case, that's what that community actually said was their preferable option, and that they were comfortable in terms of moving with that.
Thank you, Mr. Hazard.
Thanks very much, Chair. No, delighted to hear that a Northern Catholic school is doing a play about a Southern affluent Protestant. So I think it shows that even our single identity schools can branch out and be diverse, even within themselves. But just on the cross-border dynamics of all of this, we see in Fermanagh, for example, there's a lot of shared education goes on. And particularly around the cross-border things. We had teacher exchange, for example, where teachers from Church of Ireland schools in the south were coming north and teaching various things. And I'm just wondering where the cross-border dynamics of this, comes into play.
Peace 4 programme is very much a cross-border programme. There's going to be funding for both the Irish government and the local executive in terms of the shared education programme, and we would see it very much being taken forward on a cross-border basis.
I mean, it's complementary to the work of the Deliverance Social Change Signature Project. The Signature Project has been developed for those schools who are already doing a lot of sharing and sharing in a meaningful way, to further embed that sharing, because we know that by further embedding it, they realise more of the benefits of that. The peace funding we're working with the Special EU Programmes body around, as you'll probably be aware, there is an element of funding within that specifically for shared education. The aim of that is to have a programme which will tackle schools who are not doing sharing at the moment or are doing very superficial sharing, because we know from the experience of the IFI projects that schools at that level need a different level of support and a different type of support. They need to do more work with their communities. They need to address things like timetabling issues, all of which can be overcome and all of which there is experience in terms of how you can address that. But and additionally, the peace funding will also involve the schools in the south, and we're working with the department in the south around how that can actually be implemented. Obviously, shared education is not a concept which they have per se, but again, those projects that you're talking about, I mean, those were IFI funded projects with the schools in Fermanagh were working on a cross-border basis. So we will bring that experience through the peace funding. In the totality, the peace funding and the Deliverance of Change Signature Project allow us to deliver all of the policy areas within the programme.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. You'll be glad to know that no one else has indicated. So can I thank you for your time this morning, and we'll see you again once you're coming back then, obviously, to brief us on the bill.
Thank you.
Just remind members that the next time we return to our inquiry, we'll be receiving two joint briefings, one from the Community Relations Council along with the Equality Commission, and then the second will be from Integrated Education Fund along with Professor Hamber from the University of Ulster. So that's on the 4th of February. Mr. Newton.
Thank you, Chair. Can I... It just seemed appropriate. I'd mentioned earlier to you about maybe raising an issue that, or seeking a meeting with the Glenveigh Special School. I was asked by Glenveigh to come and see them last Thursday afternoon, and that was because of the budget situation primarily. And I have to say, Chair, I was extremely impressed by the dedication of not just the teachers but in the entire staff. And I left the school and I'd made the comment to the acting principal that there are an awful lot of smiles in this school, and I really was impressed by the relationship between the pupils and the schools. I was going to ask the question that Sean raised in terms of special schools and TBUC and this initiative. But I would think, Chair, maybe one of the requests that was made to me is whether or not the, through yourself, Chair, that they might, Glenveigh might come and meet with you informally, and meet with the members of the committee, at least informally, at this stage. And if you would be happy enough to write to them, Chair, and invite them along to an informal meeting, I think at this stage, and they may wish to come on a formal basis, maybe as we get deeper into this issue. On the SEN, yes.
Are members content that we have an informal meeting with Glen Bay?
Yep.
Happy that we write? So, okay. Thank you. Moving then on to our next item of business, which is Assembly Research. We have two written briefings. One is in relation to looked after children, and one for financing education. And obviously thank Assembly Research and Caroline in particular for her work on these papers. If you're content to note, I believe that the looked after children paper is very interesting and is something which would be of use to us, and if you're content that we put that back into our packs for our health event, which is taking place then on the 18th of March. Mr. Newton?
I was just asking, Chair, is there a definition of looked after children?
In the paper, yes, there is. So it's the child under the care of the trust. It's actually in there, and I read it. I just can't remember it to hand, but it's there.
Okay.
There certainly is one there.
Okay, but again, I think this will be useful for us whenever we're talking to health colleagues then around collaboration and so on as well. This is a good example of that. Okay, members content, thank you. Moving them to correspondence, just refer you to pages 528 to 607, where we have 10 items provided under correspondence and 2 tabled items. Do members have any comment to make on?
Just on the correspondence, there was one there in relation to something called Tapestries of Colours Education.
Page 577.
Yeah, it wasn't the actual project itself, but it was the concept that it is reported that the resources received an official endorsement from CCEA. Could we get a list of all of the resources that have been produced by CCEA and those that have been endorsed by CCEA?
Ever?
In how long? In the last 5 years? Or?
Whatever's available at the moment, I don't know. Okay. Just get a flavour of it.
I was going to ask what endorsed actually meant.
Well, there's an email.
There's a quote in there.
Yes, Chairperson, as members will recall, Tapestry of Colours wrote to the committee several times seeking the committee's endorsement for their resource. The committee doesn't endorse any resources, but there's an email purportedly from, well, indicating some words that apparently CA have used in respect.
So endorsement, they may not necessarily mean funding. Do you want something with regards to funding?
Well, no, well, 2 things. One, do CCA produce teaching materials themselves?
Yes, they do.
Could we have a list of what they've produced and what's available currently? And then secondly, just over the last couple of years, is this practice of endorsing things
common practice?
I don't know.
I know they commission other organisations to produce resources as well, because there was some stuff on various subjects which the members are probably more familiar with than me. Right, so yes, we'll do.
And if they do commission them or produce them, who pays for it? Do they pay for it out of their own budget or whatever?
They would pay for that. So how CA are funded, 30 million I think runs CA. I think they get about 10 million because they charge for schools, for individuals to do exams.
Right.
And they get some money directly from the department.
Okay.
So that's where their money comes from. So
that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Any other items of correspondence, Mr. Kinahan?
Just on the ETI one, I mean, it's a good brief, but I rather felt that should we not be pushing them to come back in front of the committee again?
Well, actually, what I was going to suggest is that we perhaps defer this item and maybe consider it again next week. I think there are still a number of issues that we want to look at, but given the length of time at which the committee spent on this report, I mean, I'm still receiving sort of correspondence asking us to continue putting pressure on Eddie. So if you're content that we maybe defer and consider it at next week's meeting.
And I had something.
this is item 10.7, page 591.
That's okay. No.
You're fine.
It's about another item of correspondence.
Okay. There's an item from DE with regards to the Audit Office report on public sector sickness absence. There's still a couple of things which probably maybe we might want to look at some clarification on. So if you're happy enough that we go back, particularly around 0 hours contracts and so on. Content that we do that. Okay. Any other items, or are you happy to consider just note as deemed appropriate on the cover page?
Just one on the Education Authority, which is 606. It said work had commenced on drawing up structures for the new Education Authority. When do we get a brief on the whole concept of?
We have asked for a briefing, so if we ask Peter just to chase that up, just to get a date confirmed.
Running through my mind, I mean, I spoke on it in the chamber, because I'm told a whole lot of things that can't. Once the 5 boards go, new authority is like appointments, principals, and others. There isn't enough time left if there isn't a principal to go through the interviews and get it all in place. Is there anything in place to move us from 5 to 1?
We need to see whether there's a transitional arrangement.
That's the word I'm looking for.
I think that's their first day arrangements, which I think they referenced in the little note. I think the committee had been seeking. I don't think we actually sought an oral brief, we sought information, so I could follow up with the department, get them to write more information, and then if members are.
It may be useful for us to have an oral briefing.
Thank you.
If there are a number of questions, and obviously just to fit that in. I think probably given the enormity of what this is going to actually do, it would be appropriate for us to have an oral brief.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments on correspondence?
Are we at table correspondence?
We're now moving on to table correspondence. Mr. McCausland.
Okay. We have there the letter from the Department of Youth Services for Irish Medium Education, which I asked about. There was the letter of the 5th of December. I thought the figure was 140,000. They say here 130,000 for additional opportunities for informal learning in the Irish language.
Per annum.
Right?
Per annum.
Yes. Per annum. And it mentions there that that has been provided since 2009 on an annual basis for the 5 educational library boards and the Youth Council to contribute to the implementation of Recommendation 18 of the Review of Irish Medium Education. Tried to open, I couldn't get the document open to find out what Recommendation 18 is, but anyway, get that in due course. But when I looked then at, because some of this obviously goes through the Youth Council, in their submission to the draft budget, the Youth Council said, since 2009, DE has provided resources to the Youth Council as part of its grant allocation to contribute to Recommendation 18. Work developed by this initiative has recently been evaluated internally by Youth Council. As a result, additional work plans are underway to support the recommendation of the review. However, this additional work requires additional resourcing to a level which cannot be sustained in the face of a 20% reduction in the Youth Council NI budget. Now, I'm not sure what their final cut in their budget was, but obviously, after all the discussions in the last week or so. But none of that makes it actually clear what exactly is this for, and do they not get funded just the same as other youth clubs and youth activities? Youth clubs just apply to the board and they get money for running costs or core costs or whatever. Every other youth club operates that way. Why is there something special? And what is Recommendation 18? It's just, I thought the department in their answer might have spelt those things out to make it plain, because what happens is you get half an answer like that and then you have to go back and ask again. It takes twice as long.
Would you like to seek further clarification?
Yeah, that's the word.
I think we'll share the department was previously, I think, advised that the additional money was to provide opportunities for young people to engage with activities through the medium of the Irish language.
But that's what an Irish medium youth club's about. So why do they not just get funded the same as other youth clubs?
I think it's Youth Council Northern Ireland, isn't it, that have got the
money? But it says here that the money goes to the 5 boards and the Youth Council. Now, what I picked up was out of the Youth Council, but I don't know what the 5 boards use it for. And does it mean that they Irish media ones only apply to this, or do they apply to the ordinary money that everybody applies to, but get a top-up from this? I don't know. It's just there's no clarity about it.
Okay, we have actually in the next item of correspondence actually asking for the representative the representative forum of the Irish medium youth sector to come and brief us.
Sorry, I couldn't hear because there was too much talking at the other end of the table about election time and so on.
But there's been a request by the Irish Medium Youth Sector to come and discuss.
Well, before they come, it'll be good for us to get
more information.
Yes, get so we know what they're coming about. Thank you.
Okay, so members then content with dealing with the remainder of the correspondence as per the cover sheet? Okay.
He wasn't girded about me.
Okay, moving then to the draft work programme. There's a copy at pages 609 to 613. Next week's meeting will be held at W5. Members will receive an update on the Momentum Digital Strategy and also a briefing on the Careers Review Report. Lunch and time permitting, there will be a short tour at W5 after the meeting, and this will be followed up with a visit to Curry Primary School. And this is to allow members to view STEM in action in a local primary school, and obviously Mr McCausland's constituency. So members are content to endorse the forward work programme. Okay, thank you. Do members have any other business at this stage?
Just one little thing, Chair. This week we received an email from the Minister in terms of ETI's work. Word around this report. I wonder, is it possible for us to get a more detailed briefing from them of that?
Chair, I sent the report round to members with a little note just what was within it. Next week, actually, it'll be in packs. So next week's focus is around careers and indeed STEM issues. But so I kind of thought we might talk about them. But so if members would like a briefing from ETI, it sounds like on what they found.
Yeah, I think particularly.
And I think we may need to have ETI up to also talk around shared education as well. So they may come up to talk about. Would that be complicated for them to talk about the two things? Yes, possibly.
I think, Chair, given what we did the last time for the previous inquiry, it might be a good idea that, say, after Easter, when we've had all our evidence taken, we get the department to come up and talk about, well, whatever questions have been put forward by witnesses. To also tell us then about the ETI review of CRED, and then at a separate briefing perhaps we'll ask ETI to tell us about the world around us.
I'm quite happy because I think particularly it's my concerns about STEM in the primary schools. You know, if we can tie it into something else, a STEM related session or whatever, that's fine.
Just I would love to have done it next week, but it's just we have a bit of a full programme. We're going on to a school. Would have fitted really neatly, but
that's fine.
Fine.
So, well, can I just remind members that we will be going on to that school and to have that in their diary, because I would like to have more than just a few members in attendance. You know, given the fact that we are going out to school, and they will have made preparation for us. So. If you can make that effort, we really appreciate it. It will only be for around about an hour.
Maximum, yeah. They're at 1:15, leaving at 2:15.
So if you can make sure that that's in your diary, I would appreciate that. Thank you very much. So just a reminder again that we are in W5 at 10 a.m. next Wednesday, the 28th of January. And if members are content, the committee is adjourned. Oops.
I'm malcontent.
We're malcontent. We're not quite adjourned yet?
No, it's just the following on from the lengthy discussion we had there. There was quite a lot of questions in our pack that Peter had just gone to a lot of trouble to formulate, and we didn't ask them. Could we not just ask them now in writing?
Yes, we could do that.
Particularly around the Queen's input and so on.
Yes, okay, and there's issues around levels of progression as well.
Yeah,
too.
yeah, there was a lot of stuff there.
Okay, so what hasn't been asked, we'll write to the department.
No problem.
Okay.
I'll give you a few more.
Okay, yeah. Members are content. The committee's adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, members.